Hi, I am Sabina Matharu and I am the host of the Women in Leadership Summit. I'm also the founder of the Empowerment Portal and best-selling author and speaker. And I'm super passionate about supporting women in leadership and I guess also men in leadership, really, because we should be inclusive. And this is why I decided to bring this community together, and I'm holding a virtual Women in Leadership Summit to help support, share best practice, and bringing people together from different organizations with their views in terms of how they empower and develop women and I guess men a little bit too, in the workplace. Now, today I have a very special guest with me. It's Simon Ratcliffe, and he is actually chair of cultural diversity within his organization, and he's a great believer in inclusion. His official title is a principal consultant inside the advisory services of ENSONO. And a bit of background before I move over and sort of open up to Simon is that he's actually an established thought leader and innovator. And he has also served as a virtual CIO, CIO and the CIO advisor and leadership mentor for a wide variety of organizations before joining ENSONO as a principal consultant. Now, Simon works with organizations to build high-performing IT teams and to foster a culture of innovation and change. And he holds also a master's in psychology, which is fantastic. And he's also a trained accountant and a former finance director, as well as being an RFU licensed rugby coach. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about rugby and how that actually relates to leadership capabilities and how to do that. So welcome, Simon.
Thank you, Sabine. I'm pleased to be here. It's always good to be involved, I think, in initiatives that are intended to enhance the view and the power of women in business, because often I watch podcasts like this, webcasts like this, and it's always women talking. So it's nice to be the man actually in the room as well.
That's why I said, look, I'd really like to hear men's perspective, because I think we need to actually exchange understanding in that sense, and sort of formulate that being together rather than even creating a bigger segregation.
Absolutely, and I think that's something I've discovered in my other work on diversity. Is it's one of the things I think is really important is language in a way. Is how people talk to each other, and at the risk of being slightly controversial, I think men and women talk very differently. Mm-hmm. I think other cultures also talk very differently. I mean, I've worked all around the world. I've worked in India, I've worked in Australia, I've worked in South Africa, and I've noticed the way that people communicate is very different. And the problem is, if all you do is you gather those groups together, they'll just talk the same language, and that doesn't help the diversity in any of this at all. It's only when you start to bring people in who aren't part of that, irrespective of their gender or their race or religion or anything else like that, that's how you start to realize that perhaps actually in any group in there that there is this, well, it's not quite a closed language, but it's certainly a language that's unique to that group, and it's about trying to break that out a little bit and make sure people are communicating in ways that people outside that group understand as well. And part of the issue, I think, where we've got to with, if you like, women not being as successful as they should be, is that the male stereotype language has taken over. And dare I say, if we're going to paint a broad picture here, and this is a broad statement, so it's clearly not applicable to everything, but there is a very traditional male approach to language, to communication inside business, and actually I don't like a lot of it, never mind what anybody else thinks of it. And I think a lot of the work I do is about breaking that barrier down and saying, okay, actually let's break that model completely if we can, and see if we can do it in a different way, and see if we can get those other voices to percolate up. And maybe even up's the wrong word there,
but I totally relate what with what you're saying, because I'm working in the technical industry myself, and you kind of mold to what people understand or who you think is your target audience. And when I speak to women, I speak very differently. I have a different tone of voice. I use different language, vocabulary, and I think I'm more talking intuitively. And we also even mention things like energy, because I believe there's an underlying energy in terms of how we do business, and when we meet people, there's an atmosphere in the room and all that stuff that's not really been said in a boardroom as such.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in the boardroom, there's a set of rules and regulations about who can speak when and what you can say. And again, I'm not a believer in keeping those structures together. And I think, yeah, we've talked before, and I often fall back to rugby as a really good example of how to create a structure, even compared to other sports.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I coach rugby, and what I do in that is I am trying to teach up to 15 people, and I teach a lot of children as well, so 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds sometimes. And what I'm trying to teach them is to make their own decisions, to arrive and create their own language around a pitch. So you'll find that I teach 3 or 4 different teams. They've all got their own way of communicating with each other. And I notice there's a big difference. For example, I coach in clubs where I have age groups, if you like, that come from lots of different schools. And they have to find a way of communicating. But I also coach in schools where those children know each other and are with each other all day, and they communicate in a very different way. I can't impose my structure on that at all.
Mm-hmm.
All I can do is I can empower them to have a thought process that relates to the game of rugby. And that way, when I watch the game, when they're playing, I just keep my mouth shut.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you look at, for example, football, you quite often see the coaches, they're screaming from the touchlines, they're telling people what to do. It's very clear they're in charge. With me, I'm not in charge. I'm just empowering people. And I think those, if you like, are 2 different management styles. And one of those is, I like to think one of those is a lot more inclusive. And we do look at other aspects in rugby than just about winning the game. And I think that's also the difference. In business, we get very focused on, we've got to get the deal, we've got to win this, we've got to do that. Actually, if we backtrack and work out why we're doing things and take a different view and get the right people involved, irrespective of their background or their position or their status. It's most businesses have board meetings, they have management meetings, they have senior leadership meetings. They're automatically setting an agenda that's controlled by those people and setting a language that's controlled by those people. And actually, that's not necessarily the culture of the rest of the organization. And that's not enabling the rest of the organization, who in many cases will have all the good ideas that everybody else is desperately looking for.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, a really good example of that to me is, and one of the things I always try to do is be inclusive. Most companies I've come across have a mission statement or a vision statement. And if you actually stand up and say to people, okay, what is your vision statement? They'll recite it to you. And then you ask, how many people in the business were involved in writing it? So many organizations actually give that to a third-party agency. Well, how can a third-party agency write your vision statement? And then you turn around to HR and say, well, do you fire people if they don't abide by it? And then they'll go, well, no, you can't do that. It's like, well, you can if they've written it. Mm-hmm. So if you get people to write it and you engage the whole organization in establishing, first up, you'll get something very different to what most corporate statements are, but you'll get something that's really reflective of the organization, but also then you can hire and fire on the basis of it.
Exactly. And also they will have this ownership because they were part of creating this vision, and they want to live that.
Yeah. And I think that is a really simple way of including people, that it's an opportunity so many organizations miss. And the other element I think goes quite badly wrong, and it's something we do really well, I have to say, in ENSONO, is you get the management down initiatives. So yeah, we've decided we're going to do this. That group that you referred to earlier that I chair, the culture and diversity group, is actually owned by the associates, the staff. There is no management allowed in it. And we gather between ourselves what we believe is the case, and then we go and we identify a number of initiatives that we can do as the associates of the organization to then try and shape the way the business functions. And the management essentially give us, not a huge amount, but they give us a budget for some of these initiatives. And if we've got bigger ones or we want to make bigger changes, then they will listen to us. But the key is all the members of that are the day-to-day staff. There is no management involved, and that works really, really well.
Yeah. And this way drives like innovative thinking, creativeness. So it's not like, oh my gosh, what is this? Was my manager going to think about this, or this senior manager? If there is more senior leaders involved, if it's just the group and it's just a working group and collaborative, it probably
It is,
fosters
and
these relaxed environment.
exactly. And my promise to them is exactly the same as a rugby coach. I'll facilitate the conversations. The only difference is when they do need to go back to management, I'll take them there. So if anybody is going to get a kick, and it'll be me,
Yeah.
which is fair. That's part of the deal. But it's we also I think it's quite important that we do it anonymously as well. So if any idea is an idea, but nobody's name goes, whether it succeeds or whether it fails, it doesn't matter. Nobody's name goes against it. So that encourages people then to come up with, say some of the wackier ideas, but actually some of those wackier ideas are the really good ones that we wouldn't have thought of any other way. And that's important. So
brilliant. So that's a really good idea for perhaps other organizations to think about creating this kind of group.
yes.
Would you see like have you got the same amount of women in a group as men, and how did this group actually come together?
So oddly, so we've got several versions of them. So there's my group, if you like. My group's not really mine. I'm just the figurehead, which is culture and diversity, which is about trying to make sure it's not necessarily about, but trying to make sure there's inclusion in the business. I think we're quite an inclusive business, but it's about recognizing inside our business that actually there are differences. So here's a really good example. This operates in our UK component of the business. I think a lot of UK businesses, if you look at them, we are given a number of days holiday a year, but we're also given bank holidays. We're given Christmas, we're given Easter, we're given Christian bank holidays. Actually, not everybody in our business is a Christian. And if they are a Muslim, a Hindu, a Jew, and many others, I'm not going to list them all, they have different days that they want to celebrate. There's Eid was this weekend. Diwali for the Hindus is coming up fairly soon. If they want those days off, they have to take those days off in addition to the Christian holidays that perhaps they don't want.
Yeah.
Actually, there's something that a lot of organizations could change. And interestingly, as a 24/7 organization, we need people to work on Christmas Day.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, if they don't celebrate Christmas,
yeah.
So the whole thing becomes unnecessarily complicated. And I think it's about simple things, about reflecting that. Not that it not that it fundamentally changes necessarily the work, but what it does is it recognizes that people are different, and to be able to do that. And we also celebrate those festivals. So with Eid, we had a celebration in the office, and the people who were celebrating it shared their celebration with staff in the office, and there's a Q&A session.
Yeah.
So I now know a lot more about Eid than I did a year ago, because they shared it, they expressed it, they said why it was important to them. And there was a lot of parts about it I didn't even know, let alone didn't understand. And that then becomes interesting, because that brokers further conversations with people, and people begin to understand why people do things in different ways. And why does that person go home at that particular time? Well, they do it for a reason that's important to them, and we need to understand that. So I think that's kind of driving that level of understanding. It's breaking down those barriers.
Breaking down the barriers, building bridges. And I think it also goes further than just within your organization, because you can now teach that, in your family, and discuss, why there is Eid, and you bring that into your circle of friends now as well, outside of the organization. And this is how I see we can all make a difference. That is why I'm doing this virtual Women in Leadership Summit, because I know I can't stop war. I can only influence the people that are right around me, and then we can actually create this ripple effect by having these kind of conversations, by positively, building bridges and sort of breaking down those kind of barriers between the cultures, and supporting each other.
It is, and I think it's also about learning that And dare I say, this is where the slightly traditional, I can say this because I am one, middle-aged white male approach to life, which is, there is a structure, there is a hierarchy, and the man at the top says this is how it's going to work. This is where we can start to break that down and encourage organisations to have a much more democratic view of the world. I'm a huge fan of the notion of the leader as a servant, which is how I approach the rugby coaching, for example. I am not in charge. I am setting the guidelines. I am imparting the knowledge that I have that the other people don't have, and I'm making suggestions. But really, this is about saying, okay, within these guidelines and to attain these objectives, you guys need to figure it out. And sometimes you get some really blank looks, especially from some sort of 8 and 9-year-olds, and they go, really? What are you asking us to do? I'm saying, look, there's the ball. There's the other end of the pitch. Figure out how to get to it.
Yeah.
And then I learn from them, because I've seen some really clever ways of doing things like that, which I've then taken on to other teams. And I think that's a really, really important function that I spend a lot of time coaching leaders in, is to say, look, you don't have to make all the decisions. In fact, nobody wants you to make all the decisions. And bluntly, half the time, you don't want to make the decisions either. You find these quite tough. You feel really stressed. You should. It's almost a function that the further up the management tree you get, the less actually that you do. I mean, a really good example of that was one of the best leaders I ever came across a few years ago. Well, quite a few years ago, certainly in the days before mobile phones. If I ever wanted to speak to him, I used to have to call his secretary. And he had an office in London in Soho Square, and I'd say, yeah, can I speak to John? Is he in the office? And she said, no, he's on the bench. What on the bench meant to him was a bench in the middle of Soho Square, and he used to sit there for 2 or 3 hours a day smoking a cigar. I say to him, what are you doing? You're supposed to be running this business. And he said, no, I've got people who can run the business. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to sit here figuring out what we're doing next year and who it is and how I need to give them some information to get there. Because I'm not going to do it. But if they haven't got that almost sense of purpose. So there's a man who probably spent, he won't forgive me for saying this, 2.5 days a week sitting on a bench smoking a cigar and probably doing the most valuable piece of management that I've ever seen.
Wow. So. Yeah, that's a great story. And you're right. It is about, it's about remembering what a leader should be doing. It's about setting the vision and the management is something different.
Yeah. And interestingly, he always said to me that when he needed those ideas communicating in his business, he would find women mainly to do it. He said, because he found they communicated it in a way that was more, I'm going to say emotional, and that sounds like a negative thing. That's not what I mean. It wasn't a binary, hardcore management. These are the objectives. This is what we're going to do. It was very much explaining why. I think the why is the bit that gets missed out a lot of the time, and I think there is a distinct difference, as you said earlier, in the way that men and women communicate, and I think women are far, far better at putting the why in there. And I think as a psychologist, I think a lot of that is rooted, dare I say it, and this could be accused of being sexist, but I see it as real positive, in the whole childcare and child rearing element, because I think children, let's face it, anybody who's got children knows that between the ages of 2 and 6, the only question you ever hear is why. It's constant. It is a constant. And in that more traditional role, women, I think, are far better at realizing that why becomes the fundamental thing. And as we all grow up, actually, I think we stop asking why, but we still need to know why. We just become afraid to ask the question sometimes. And if we can find a way of communicating visions and futures with the why, then actually you're answering the question that people have become afraid to answer. As we've got older, I think we're afraid in many ways of being seen to not know the answer.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it is so important. And again, this goes across the board, that we all need to sit there and realize that not knowing the answer is a massive strength. It is not a weakness.
Yeah, because you're kind of scared of being judged and of something that you might be, oh, have you not read the briefing? Why are you
Yeah.
asking again, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Even though the briefing doesn't actually give you the why in the
No.
first place. And interestingly, the other problem I have found is where I have challenged boards with, well, can you explain why? I've suddenly realised they don't know why either.
Mhm.
They're doing it almost because that's what you do. That's the way you do it, and that's, again, I think that's one of the things in it's very, very evident in the rugby world. I mean, if you look at, we're coming into the Rugby World Cup now, and it was rather a catastrophic event when the World Cup was in England a few years ago, and everybody expected England to go forward. We've won it before, and we got knocked out, embarrassingly, in the first round, and we fired the coach, as you do, because although that's less common in rugby than it is in football. And then suddenly, that England team didn't lose a game for nearly 2 years. But they didn't change the players, and they didn't change the laws of the game. In fact, they didn't change anything except the coach. And what that coach did was he just looked at them and said, why are you doing what you're doing? It's clearly not working. So go figure out another way. And he will openly say he didn't tell them what to do. He just empowered them to do it.
Mhm.
And he changed their philosophy rather than the mechanics of what they were doing. I think sometimes in business we have a tendency to be quite mechanical.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like when we were recruiting, particularly in IT. I see job descriptions all the time, and I've got one that I was reading yesterday. It's 3 pages long, and the first 2 3/4 pages of it are a list of technical capabilities. And then on the bottom it says, must be a team player.
Yeah.
So I
Yes.
rang up the company. I rang up the company who'd written it and said, "What does that mean?" And they said, "Well, it's just what you write on the bottom of a job description, isn't it?" It's like, okay. I said, "So personality-wise, well, I just need somebody with the technical skills." It's like, no, you don't. You need somebody with the right personality.
Mhm.
And if you don't understand what that personality looks like, you will simply recruit somebody who looks like you with the technical skills.
Yeah.
Because you haven't actually got another reference point to go against it. And it's, I mean, again, going back to rugby, the best team in the world, generally speaking, the Welsh would probably disagree with me at the moment. I would always say is the All Blacks, the New Zealand All Blacks.
Mhm.
And they have a very, very simple statement. And they say, the best rugby players in the world, or the best rugby players in New Zealand, do not make the best All Blacks. The best people do.
Mhm.
And they will openly tell you that there are some fantastically talented rugby players in New Zealand who will never make the All Blacks because they're the wrong kind of people. And I think we need to start applying the same to business, and we need to build that blend. So again, with the All Blacks, they will tell you that they're not all the same kind of people, and they're definitely not all the same kind of people. They don't have this, there's not a template for the person. It is they want that diversity, and they have the they have the Maori background, they have the white background, for want of a better phrase, and they mix all of that up, and they blend all of that, and they share all of those elements between them. And I think that works really, really well. And we need as a culture to get better and better at doing that. And then I think then it becomes inclusive for everybody. I think it's not just women in that mix. I think it will help women massively,
Yes.
but it will help a lot of other minorities that are in there.
Yeah.
And I think the other really, really key thing in IT is that we don't teach people properly in schools how to prepare for a future in IT. We teach technical skills to people. And if we're teaching technical skills to 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, the only thing I can promise you is by the time they come to work, they'll be irrelevant, because it'll be like, it's great, I know how 5.25-inch floppy disk works, but it's not much use to me these days.
Yeah. It should be more like entrepreneurial skills, creative thinking, innovation, problem solving, more generic things. I absolutely agree with you.
And interestingly, if you teach all of those things and you look at assessment reports, because I'm a governor in a middle school as well, so I see these assessment reports, and consistently, girls outperform boys.
Wow.
Consistently, and have done for years. And it's a bit like when I get rugby players at 9, 10, and 11, and consistently girls are far more aware of what is going on than boys are.
Mm-hmm.
That what we then do is we layer this technical skill on top of it, and we flatten the skills that we actually need and say, well, you haven't got those, but actually those girls, those women, as they then become, have all those critical thinking skills that we actually desperately need. And but we don't teach in the right way, and therefore we don't value when it comes out into the workplace. And that's really unfortunate, because not only do we need to value it, but we desperately need it, because we're so rooted on, oh, they got, can they program in Python? It's like, I don't care. Can they logically think? Can they critically think? Can they arrive at a conclusion? And that's why we recruit in the wrong way, which is why we misbuild the teams in the first place. I mean, I think the biggest challenge we've got collectively trying to do something like this is actually knowing where to start sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's multi-pronged. It's, we need to start at that education level. We need to change the way the existing management, male, female, black or white, doesn't matter, think, because we need to build a much more dynamic and democratic process in organizations. And I think that will change. I think the whole gig approach to it is changing things, because those of us that work consistently with external clients, I spend all my life with third-party clients, I'm not part of that hierarchy. And that's really beneficial, because it does mean it's always easier on the outside looking in. Makes me look cleverer than I am, but it's easier as well. And to be able to challenge that and not allow this hierarchy to go marching on. I think that it will implode, but it is finding lots and lots of people, which is what you're doing, which I think what you're doing is so exciting. It's finding lots of people with lots of different angles on this.
Mm-hmm.
All of whom I think have got fairly consistent visions. And I think between us, if we all focus on the little bit that we can change, with a bit of luck.
Exactly. It's the ripple effect. That's my vision. Wow, it's been so many golden nuggets, and I'm thinking I'm probably going to go and summarize some of these things, because there's so many things, so many pointers that you've given that actually other organizations could just take and sort of implement. So it's been really insightful, and your different angles with the sports, the psychology, and the IT, just fusing, and the schools, I guess, also, fusing together.
Well, the kids of the future.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think so too. So I'd like to conclude this interview, and thank you so much, Simon, for being a super guest and for sharing all your amazing insights. What I will do with the video as well, I'll just share a link where, if the viewers want to share their, their views or answer to Simon or questions, then maybe, we can come back and just sort of, probably going to be on LinkedIn somewhere. And comments are very welcome. Feedback is welcome too. And if you'd like to link in with the Women in Leadership going forward, continuing the conversation, there's going to be more of these interviews. And also in the background, I'm working with about 20 experts that all have different leadership skills. They also work in mental wellness, physical wellness. We have a career coach as well as an entrepreneurial coach as well. And we're actually putting together an empowerment portal at the moment. It's just for women. However, we're going to create that for men as well as we move forward. So please have a look at what we do there. If you need some support, resources, if you think you want some people coming to your organization to do some training workshops, then the portal actually supports all of that. So it's a virtual as well as a kind of an offline and one-to-one kind of portal where you have access to a directory of experts and connect with us in that way. So I'll leave that with the viewers as well. So thank you so much, Simon. And any last words from you before we close?
I think the really important thing actually is what you're doing in all of this because this is so multifaceted, and I think there is a danger sometimes that we get a little bit single-minded. I see a lot of these events for women, and it's talking about women in leadership, and I understand that's what this is called, but because this is so multifaceted, what you're doing by bringing lots of different people together, that is brilliant. And I think that is something that the more people that can go out there and share that's it's so multifaceted, and it is about bringing people together.
Oh,
That
thank you.
becomes really, really important. So I'd encourage anybody watching, and anybody who's watching the recording, the more you can share this notion, and not and challenge every aspect that you see, because if you see a different aspect, it's probably worth challenging. And don't just remember that's not the only aspect, and that other people will have the other areas as well. And sometimes it's just about how you collect those together.
Absolutely.
Which is why I think this is a brilliant idea.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and it is something that I've been inspired to do. You know, it's not that I kind of sat down and made a business plan. That's what I'm going to do. It's just an idea that came to me, and I believe that I'm kind of some sort of a messenger that needed to go and do. And as you know, I'm probably just going to mention at the end, there is also books that I'm writing. So there's 4 books. The first one was Rise in Pursuit of Empowerment, and the other idea was, of course, to go out and write a book with 100 women. So it's just expanded from there, because through the book, I had invitations to do some lunchtime talks, and organizations became interested in this movement, and then one led to the other, and here I am. This is how we arrived, and I'm sure there's more of a journey. And of course, if anyone wants to get involved and also be part of, you know, this interview series, then reach out to me. I'll be very happy to organize it. Okay, thank you so much, Simon.
Okay.
And we'll see you soon. Bye.